And welcome back to Forbes Sports Money. Scott Boras, the most powerful agent in baseball, is known for his vast wealth of information and statistics. Now, he began his baseball life as a player, but after injuries ended his on-field career, Boras went to law school seeking a different path. And when his former teammates began requesting his services, Scott Boras, the sports agent, was born. He's been brokering record-breaking contracts in mega deals ever since. And in an era of agency mergers and Wall Street investors, the Boras Corporation has remained above the fray and ahead of the pack. Michael Ozanian traveled to Newport Beach, California for our Sports Money Profile.
Scott, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the agency business. We see agents now seem to jump ship on a daily basis. How have you been able to remain independent and the largest sports agent in the world?
Well, our philosophy is based upon what I believed when I was a player was in the best interest of a player. And that is that if you have hedge funds or you have capital interests that are governing the conduct of what is in the best interest of an athlete, you're going to have conflict, and you're also going to have something that I think is what the principle we're trying to sustain, and that is we want the best for the athlete. That may mean turning down a multi-year contract. It may be delaying or advising the athlete to not sign at a particular time. It may not fit the revenue streams of the agency. It may not fit that of the return on investment that ownership of capital investors require. So our policy was that everything has to be paid for, no debt, as we grow this company, that we're not going to be in a position where outside interests are going to control the best interests of the athlete.
What were some of the particular experiences you went through as a player that helped shape your philosophy of running Boras Corp?
Well, you saw great players being advised to do things that, in my mind, were for the interests of the agents or the agency. For example, the risk factors of this game need to be calculated. Athletes need to have a great deal of information. It's easy to see dollars given, and here's millions of dollars. If you don't take this contract, you're running a risk of injury, malperformance, and other such. That's easy. That's what everybody says. The question is that the player's value? And what is his value in a time frame? What exactly is his risk of injury considering his body type, his performance levels, the position he plays, the time that he plays in the game, what his talents are worth relative to the market in totality? And that process is one that requires a great deal of study, research, information, and risk-taking. But the goal of the concept is the person that needs to make that decision is not the agent or the agency or the owners for their particular purpose. That the goal is that the athlete can make an informed decision, that he himself decides what is best for him.
In the mid-'80s, you started hiring statisticians and economists and started bringing in a lot of non-baseball people, if you will, to build up this database. Was this a big risk? Were people thinking that, hey, Scott, you're nuts, you're expanding money on the wrong resources at that time?
I studied medicine when I was in undergrad and graduate school, and I'd always revert to the studies. And the thing about medicine is that it's not a pure science. It's not absolute. It's about percentages. And then you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out every way as a baseball player, how can I hit 300, when I'm in A-ball or I'm in AA, and I'm, where can I go get more information about my approach as a player? And so largely what we do in our practice area with players is that our database and the use of it is largely in place to help them execute their goals and their contracts and achieve what they can do by understanding themselves. And you go to a player and you talk about self-understanding. If you don't have data on the table, you don't want to get it into a situation where he is not looking at something empirical. You want it to be where he's looking at facts. And that way, what you have to say has an objective rather than subjective point of view to him. And you get more of an understanding and more execution from the player by having that data.
Do the owners come to you and say, you know, can we ask you what your data is saying? Do you have ideas about how we can build a better roster?
Absolutely. You know, we encourage it because we want, you know, we represent players. They employ players. This union is a cooperative venture to get performance at the highest levels. And that dynamic is something that, and we have psychologists on our staff. We do everything we can to invest in the player, commit to the player, to make sure that his skill is getting on the field. And I want owners to know that because no one else does it, because it's the hedge fund owners or the corporate owners that go. The reason, you know, people have come to us and said, here's hundreds of millions of dollars, buy this company. And I said, I'm not sitting across from a parent and a player and selling him so I can make money. Now, granted, it's been done, and we've even had agents go in to and become owners. They use the money of selling the player to become an owner. That's not something philosophically I would ever do. That's not why I came into this. I came into it because baseball is giving us everything we have, and our principles have proved our point. We didn't sell the company. We didn't let the hedge funds or the financial companies come in and buy us or our players. We stayed true to our credo of we're doing what's best for the players, and we think that's best for baseball.
So without outside influences, Scott Boras remains a free agent. We're going to step aside for just a moment, but we will have more with super agent Scott Boras. We're continuing our discussion now with Scott Boras, who has had an incredible impact on professional baseball and who continues to help guide the sport into the future. Michael Ozanian discussed that influence and where baseball might be going in part 2 of our Sports Money Profile.
You were the one that first discovered how underpaid players in the amateur draft were. And, you know, I mean, that's really what got your business booming in the early to mid 80s. What convinced you that that was the case?
I was in the Cardinal organization, and this athlete came through. His name was Gary Templeton, and he was their first round pick. And Tempe learned how to switch hit in 3 weeks. And it was the classic thing, what can I do better than him? And in about 10 days, I figured out that would be not much. And the reality of it was I started looking at his value because there was no one like him. And he went on to have a 17-year major league career. But in my mind, I'm saying, why is he getting such a low value when other players are getting values near him which are nowhere near as good? So I realized that the star draft player, which needs to be separated from the other drafted players, because the phenomena of saying 98% of the draft picks have, you know, dramatically different value than the 1 or 2%, that's true. It's probably bad business for teams to invest a lot of money in 98% of the draft. But for those select few, the amount of worth and value that they have to teams, it should be absolutely separated from everyone else. Then the question is, how do you define that? And the answer is, it's really easy when they're that good. But the system doesn't allow for the separation economically. It never did. And so consequently, we went and built a market for those unique players. And I think that every player that we've had who's been given a bonus over $5 million, they've gone on to be all-stars, great successes. All the math has proved true that these players are worth millions and millions of dollars to owner, even though they only had to spend a few million more to attract them and purchase them.
Was the evidence that you were right even proven more by guys that came out of the draft that you got big deals for that were, let's say, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round picks?
Well, the thing is, it wasn't where they're drafted, because the draft in baseball is not a talent-driven draft. It is an economic structure. Because if there was no cap on this draft, then you know a true draft will happen, because if teams could trade players, only then will it be a talent-driven draft. Because the team will always draft the best player, even though they can't sign him, and then trade him. So the best player then becomes a commodity of the team, the best talent. Until they do that, you're never going to have a draft that's true in baseball. In other sports, you can trade picks. You can do that. And so the best talent has a value, even though you may not want to spend that much to sign him. You may want to trade that value and get other major leaguers or other minor leaguers in return. It still has a value. So with these artificial systems, until they truly create that rule where value, the player's skill is related to his true value, you're going to have this artificial behavior that occurs in the draft market.
Given the current CBA, which was obviously different from when you started Boris Corp, could you have gotten off to as fast a start with your company today, given the current CBA, as you did then?
Again, under the rules, we've identified the best players, and we've gotten the highest bonuses allowed in this structure. But the magnitude of it isn't anywhere near the true value. In Chicago, I've got Abreu and I've got Bryant. And here's a player who, was a fine player in Abreu, and he's lives in a foreign jurisdiction. He gets $70 million, and Bryant gets $7 million. When you have that dynamic going on, you can see that the face of the rules is creating value, not the talent. And we don't want American boys suffering for baseball's concocting rules where foreign jurisdictions get to take advantage of a system that is not, it should be balanced for American players and for foreign jurisdictions. And until we create that rule where you can trade draft picks, only then will the truest form of value come to the teams, and that is you should only pay for skill, talent. You should only invest in that. And systems should not be a detriment to that truth happening.
What would be the top 4 or 5 priorities you've had to improve the CBA?
Well, revenue sharing is tremendous, except now we developed a system where owners bought teams. They remained in last place. They took the revenue sharing money, and they basically spent that money to operate the team, didn't improve it. And then they sold the team knowing they didn't spend money for 4 or 5 years to operate it, and they made, at the time, $200 and $300 million, and now $800 and $900 million, because the franchises are in the billions now. My attitude is, you don't get revenue, you get to use revenue sharing, but when you sell the team, you have to give it back if you're not successful. Players have gradients to measure success. So should owners, particularly incoming owners. So if you're coming into baseball and you don't contribute to it, and you don't contribute to winning and benefiting the game, you don't get to use the money that comes primarily from the successful ownerships, the major market teams. I think from a perspective of what we do, from the last collective bargaining agreement, we've made some fundamental mistakes. We've got to make sure that players who spend 6 years in the major leagues, and they're one of the few group, that small 15% that ever make it. And mind you, less than 1% of the players who sign pro contracts ever spend 6 years in the major leagues. But those who are actually in the big leagues and they make it to free agency, that right structure is meaningful, and that all clubs have access to it. It does not cost them draft picks. That they can improve their team at the major league level and also improve their team at the draft level, and give them that opportunity to do that, rather than the current rules that we have that require you to give away draft picks to sign free agents. That's not in the best interest of baseball, because a lot of mid-level teams cannot give up their draft, which is hugely important to them, to help their major league team. And I think the other aspect of it is our entry-level system, the draft, and many of the things we spoke about, is that we have got to make sure that American players, the greatest athletes in America that are subject to the draft, have every incentive to come to this game. If you are Bryce Harper, you're worth something very, very different than a lot of other draft picks. We want to reward those players for that. Why? Because that's an incentive for that 12-year-old, 13-year-old to come and attempt to be that player. They may not be, but that incentive is there. And then we document that. And we have foreign jurisdictions receiving 60 and 70 million. Now we know what? Players who are unproven in the big leagues, who have never played here, are receiving, in advance of performance, $60 and $70 million. Why not do that for a select few American boys, since you've already done it for players from a foreign jurisdiction? I think from a strategic standpoint of the game, we've got to make sure that our greatest product, which is the World Series, becomes something very different than what it is now, a regional battle. Because we want to make sure that this becomes something of a national pride, a national exposure. And a big part of this is that when you have the Super Bowl, every media person in the world can get to that venue a year in advance because they know where it's going to be. And I believe that we need a World Series where you know where it's going to be in advance. The fans in the regional area can watch all of the games that lead up to the World Series in their home markets, the playoffs, the divisional series, the wild cards. They can do that, but we also have this neutral site annually that we can bring the World Series to and have a true World Series week where people from all over the world come, they camp. It's in one place, they know in advance. The hotels, the restaurants, everyone there, all the things that we do in the All-Star game can be just magnified because our All-Star game is the best. The reason is because we know where it's going to be a year in advance. So I think we have to really look at that to make the World Series something that it should be, because it's really it's a tremendous event.
Well, those could be some big changes to the game of baseball. We'll end our conversation with Super Agent Scott Boras when we return. And welcome back to the show. We're wrapping up our discussion now with Scott Boras, possibly the most powerful agent in all of sports, in part 3 of our Sports Money Profile.
Pete Carroll, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks, was your college roommate. Has he ever whispered in your ear, you should be an agent for football players? Have you ever been tempted to be an agent for another sport?
Yeah, we've had quite a few laughs about this subject because I always tell them, I don't want to be involved with the easy sport. I said, you only have to play once a week. I go, our players have to deal with the game every day, and so it's the kind of thing where I would be doing a disservice to the game I love and the players I represent if I was involved in another sport. That's how I feel. I've had many, many athletes come in from other sports, star players, and a wide variety of other people who want you to negotiate other things, the price of steel and whatever. The point was, I always tell them the same thing. I go, my commitment is based upon a total commitment to one game, one sport. And if I'm tired of that, I'll let you know. But we don't run this like a business, because businesses come and go. We run this about a principle, and the principle is that we're going to represent baseball players. We're going to be committed to the game of baseball, and we're going to study it and learn it every day as best we can, and apply our resources to it. And we believe that commitment is going to allow us to be what we wanted to be in life, and that was someone who could go out and compete with this game and take on this game every day.
What would you tell a young person now who's leaving law school and has visions of being the next Scott Boras?
Like any career, when I left law school, I always tell them, because I give a lot of lectures at law school, I said, by the way, my vision when I left law school, I was going to be a medical lawyer. And I played pro baseball. So to give you an idea of anybody who has a crazy vision about going into this industry, I wouldn't have that vision, because that's not how the vision arrives. What happens is that it comes to you. It comes to you because either you have an ability or such. And in my case, I had teammates, and they called me. And they illustrated to me there was a need for what I had to say and my background and what I did. And I also saw a void in the game where the game was being hurt by the fact that these great young players coming into the draft, the value of them had to be illustrated so that players would be attracted to come to baseball versus other sports, because it was artificially depressed. They needed some form of representation, and the union only represented major league players. So creating an idea, a concept, because if you're going to come to the game, you've got to figure out how you're going to beat the game. And if anyone has ideas how they can beat the game day in, day out, and advance it and help the players that play it, then I would say the risk factors say that you might want to go into it. Otherwise, I'd say practice law for a long, long time. And then if you're successful, then you might want to do it, once you've got your family's taken care of to do it. But this is a high-risk industry because everyone says it's about having clients. No, it's not. It's about having the right player. And the same thing is true for the teams. It's not about signing a number of players. It's about signing the right players.
And Michael rejoins me once again. Would you consider Scott Boras the most powerful agent in sports?
Well, by one yardstick, Bob, he absolutely is. If you look at contracts under management, Boras has $1.7 billion worth of contracts currently under management at Boras Corp. That's more than any other single agent.
And based on that, it just sounds like he would be better off probably remaining independent.
I think certainly from his standpoint, he believes that independent with his resources, his knowledge, he used to play baseball, and his database and all the metrics he looks at, he could beat any conglomeration that comes along. And so far, he has.
Yeah, he's got a great winning percentage, there's no doubt. All right, to see more from the Scott Boras interview, and I promise you there is lots of good stuff in there that we didn't have time to show you, go to Forbes.com or YesNetwork.com. For Michael Ozanian and everyone involved with the show, I'm Bob Lorenz. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.